Hello, this webinar is a part of a multiple-part series called Constitution Commencement Day. This particular webinar focuses in on the day of prayer and commitment, that is, the actual Thursday, April 30th, 1789 schedule of events. It took place in the nation's capital. Do you care to guess where that was? It wasn't Washington, D.C. It was, in fact, New York City. New York hoped to establish the national government there. They renamed a building, in fact, Federal Hall, to convince others that this was a good idea. But the federal government only existed in New York for 1 year. It went on to be in Philadelphia for 10 years, and by 1800 Washington, D.C. was being built out. The schedule of the day's activities included this. 9 a.m. the citizens were called together to pray. 10:30 a.m. they began to gather for the ceremony, and by noon we, the people, had agreed to and gathered to confirm our Constitution. At 12 p.m. there was a swearing in of the first president. At 12:30 p.m. approximately, Washington gave his inaugural address. At 1 p.m. there's a processional to divine service, which was in fact a national prayer and commitment service. And so this webinar will take a look at the yellow installments, and additional webinars will focus on the installments in blue. The citizens gathering to pray. A New York newspaper reported it this way. On the morning of the day on which our illustrious president will be invested with his office, the bells will ring at 9 o'clock, when the people may go up to the house of God and in a solemn manner commit the new government with its important train of consequences to the holy protection and blessing of the Most High. An early hour is prudently fixed for this peculiar act of devotion and is designed wholly for prayer. Imagine this being reported in newspapers in such a fashion that the new government would be dedicated to God, that it would be committed to His holy protection, and that this hour is specifically focused not on preaching or conversation, but on prayer for the new government. What a profound start to the day. So the day started in prayer, but then we, the people, bring our vow forward for the inauguration events. So it starts with a prayed-up people, and then the Constitution is what we, the people, have agreed to. What have we agreed to specifically? Well, it says this in the preamble of the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for common defense, to promote the general welfare, and to serve the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. And so this is the vow that we're bringing forward, that we the people are agreeing to as we begin the civil covenanting process with our leaders before God. Well, it's interesting to note that these 6 principles are actually 6 biblical principles. Each of these comes from different points in the Bible and are reinforced with others, but just as a quick reference, they come from Joshua 18, Exodus 18, 1 Peter 2, Romans 13, and 1 Peter 2. And there's other exploratory webinars at US Civics Training or ChristianCivicsTraining.org where you can take a look at these items in much greater detail. It's also noteworthy that we, the people, are saying that we want to ordain and establish this Constitution. If we go through the Constitution too quickly, we may miss those words, but they're right there in the preamble. So the word ordain means this: to invest in sacerdotal power. Well, sacerdotal is not an everyday word, so I looked that up, and the definition can be found to say this: dedicated, devoted, consecrated to God and His service, proceeding from God and containing religious principles. Well, I just showed you that there are all 6 of the preamble principles have biblical references, and by saying that we ordain and establish this Constitution, we're doing so in the presence of God, we're devoting it to God, we're consecrating our national covenant to God. The other word that we use is the word establish, to set and fix firmly or unalterably. And so this is our vow as the people, that we are coming forward to establish this Constitution as our governing document before God, and it's filled with biblical ideas. One last thing on the we the people side. This document says, in the year of our Lord. At the end it says, in the year of our Lord, 1787. So the Constitution has these biblical and godly elements in it, even as it also supports the biblical ideas of the Declaration of Independence. And so this is what we the people have come forward with as our vow. Now there's the leaders aspect to it. And in this part of the ceremony, we'll find our leaders, we'll find the Bible present, we'll find a Bible open, a hand on a Bible, the oath, so help me God, and the kissing of the Bible that our leaders have executed as a part of their contract or vow. So let's take a look at these elements, the swearing in and oath. On the balcony that day were leaders: George Washington, the President-elect, John Adams, Vice President, John Jay, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and others. It is noteworthy, however, to realize that the legislative bodies of the House of Representatives and the Senate were sworn in earlier weeks, and this represents the fact that the founders truly believed that the legislative bodies were the most important part of the federal government, and the President and the Supreme Court, although balance of power and equal, were slightly less equal than the legislative bodies themselves. The Bible was present, and there's some discussion as to whether it was open or closed, but with his hand on the Bible, the President-elect, George Washington, swore this oath: I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Many historical records say that then Washington broke script and said, so help me God, out loud. Some would debate to the contrary, but it's interesting, even whether it was said out loud, it's assumed because the nature of oaths make this assumption. John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration of Independence and counsel and mentor of the Founding Fathers, says this: an oath is an appeal to God, the searcher of hearts, for the truth of what we say, and always expresses or supposes an imprecation, that is, a calling down, of his judgment upon us if we prevaricate, which is to lie. An oath, therefore, implies a belief in God and his providence, and indeed is an act of worship. Daniel Webster says this: what is an oath? It is founded on a degree of consciousness that there is a power above us that will reward our virtues and punish our vices. Our system of oaths in all our courts, by which we hold liberty and property and all our rights, are founded on or rest on Christianity and a religious belief. And so whether so help me God was spoken out loud or understood quietly, the fact that Washington made that oath speaks to his commitment before God, and obviously the presence of the Bible and his hand upon it further exemplifies that commitment. The historical record then goes on in many places to say that he bent over and kissed the Bible, but there's others also that too at that point would maybe disagree. I fall back to this idea, though. The New York statutes for oaths during this period said, at that time New York law required that the usual mode of administering oaths be followed, and that is to follow your oath with so help me God, and that the person taking the oath place his hand upon the Gospels and then kiss the Gospels at the conclusion of the oath. So with this statute being in place and Washington being sworn in New York, it is highly likely that he said, so help me God, upon the conclusion of his oath, and that he bent over and kissed the Bible at the conclusion of it. And so as we wrap up this short webinar, we've looked at these 12 items as spiritual content and as a part of the civil covenanting process that took place on that day. We'll now defer to an additional webinar to explore further items of that day, including Washington's inaugural address, as well as the National Prayer and Commitment Service. My name's Craig Seibert. Thank you for listening.